Okay, so let's get started with this gospel chord preparation exercise. Man, that's a long title. Okay, so first of all, what we start with here is the bass line. Now, the bass line is pretty simple. It's not too complicated. All right, let me just go ahead through it. I'm going to say the names of the fingering as well. So it's 5, 3, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3. 2, 1. Now we're back at G, and we're going to do the same bass line again, right? But we're instead of starting at G down here, we start up here, right? And the fingering changes a little bit. Then it goes to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, and it just keeps doing that bass line. So it starts with this low G, 5, 4, 5, 3, 1, 3, 3, 1, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2. Okay, and then it just keeps going through that. Now, what's interesting about gospel music is that all of this is really what I would consider over a G chord. So if I just had like a G7, and I'm just playing just simple, just the guide tones here, the 7 and the 3rd of the G7. If I were to make a G7 chord, okay? So now, what's cool though about gospel music is that gospel musicians do not tend to just stay on one chord. They tend to move in between these different chords and do passing chords and neighbor chords, okay? Excuse me. Now, this is what you hear. This is all that like... all that stuff that you hear and you love, and you're like, oh, what is that? It's actually not super complicated. I'm not saying that it's easy, but it's not that complicated. So what I've done is I have an exercise here. We start with this. I'm going to put my left hand down here just for right now on this G. See what's happening here? See this motion in between here of these thirds? Okay, so D to F, C to E, B to G, B to D. Now we want to do this all with one hand. Using my 4th finger there. And then we can put in some grace notes. Now, this right here might create a little bit of tension in your arm, okay? Because keeping that octave open and playing chords in the middle gets to be kind of difficult, all right? So pay attention to the signals that your body's telling you. If it's starting to get tense, then you might have to change your position, or you might have to stop for a little bit and kind of build this up over time, okay? So now, if I add that on with that bass line, I get... Now, the other thing you'll notice about gospel music is that typically there's a lot of anticipation. It's not always hitting right on the beat. Oh, and by the way, the music for this is on page 2. It might be a little bit weird. I put it on page 2, okay? So it says gospel chord progression exercise. So look for it on page 2 of the sheet music. So that anticipation on the and of 4. 1, 2, 3. Of course, right now it still sounds a little bit straight or a little square because we're doing it as an exercise. Don't worry about that. That's okay. See how you can start to loosen that up? Now, Now, all I'm doing is just moving in between those three separate types of chords. Now, what are those chords? Guess what? They're really all kind of a G7 chord. Kind of. There's really a chord that's in the middle there. That's a G7, okay, just missing the third. We'll get back to that one in a second. And that's a G7 as well. Seventh is not in there, right? That's okay, so you can just consider it a G if you want. But I'm thinking that, the underlying chord is a G7. So you can think of that as G7 going to G, or you can think of that as G7. It's up to you. It really doesn't matter there. This one, though, what is that chord? This, I heard it labeled on someone else's educational DVD that's a G chord. Well, no, that is not a G chord. Definitely not. Just because G is on the bottom, this is not a G chord, okay? This is actually a C chord with G in the bass. So what's interesting, again, about this style of music, and it's not just characteristic of this style, it happens in other styles of music as well, but it's just very prevalent and pronounced in gospel music, is that alternation between the 1 chord and the 4 chord. Hear that right there? There's that 4 chord as well, going back to the 1 chord. All that 4, back to the 1 chord, okay? That 4 to 1 creates a very nice tension and also creates what? This is very interesting. Creates that suspension. There's a suspension that happens in 2 different places. The 4 to the 3 and the 6 to the 5. Now what I mean by that is this C over G chord, okay, this is C with G in the bass. This is not the suspension. I'm thinking in terms of how does this chord relate to the G chord? Well, in relation to a G chord, this would be 4, and this is 6. There's my root. So this suspension happens between 4 to 3 and 6 to 5. Right? That 4 wants to resolve down to 3, and the 6 wants to resolve down to 5. This doesn't really have to go anywhere, even though it's really tense, but you can you can stay there. But this, oh man, really feels like it wants to resolve. Okay, now that suspension creates, well, think about just the word suspension, creates suspense, right? So that suspension in there creates this sound of almost, you might say, uplifting, ethereal, almost in some ways like a religious quality to it. This right? And then where does this come from? Amen, right? It's that whole amen, the 4 to 1, all right? So this has been used in religious music for literally hundreds of years, okay? So this cadence, as we would call it, a cadence, okay? So anyway, we first of all want to get that pattern down. We want to understand that pattern. We want to also know that we're moving in between that 1 chord and the 4 chord. We don't have to overanalyze it. We could really just think of this as a passing chord in there, right? Just don't think of that as a G chord. It's really not a G chord, unless you're going to say that it's a G sus. Okay, but really, it's more a C over G. Okay, there's your C to G. So, this bass line, this pattern here is also hear how I'm just really digging into those notes. So start with this exercise, okay, and then I'll see you in the first section of the song. We'll get to work on the song, all right? Work on this exercise first up. See you in the next chapter.